a warm welcome to CSAN's Domestic Abuse Alliance in association with the National Board of Catholic Women. It's been our pleasure over the last 3 years now to be working closely with the National Board of Catholic Women to host these Alliance meetings. And we've had some very powerful exchanges and presentations in recent years. Just some housekeeping points. As you've just seen, we are recording this meeting, but we're only recording for distribution the presentations. So the discussions themselves will not be shared by a wider audience. We want people to feel this is a safe space. There may be some challenging things to be discussed, some difficult things to be discussed. So we want people to feel this is a safe space, and anything you say here certainly won't be taken beyond this place. So if you could please respect that, that would be great. As always, please use the chat function on Zoom. If there's any comments or questions as they arise, we can use the chat function. We'll get some great speakers to look forward to in a moment. We welcome from the CSAN team. We have Alia, who's been working closely with Nikki to organise it all this morning. Alia, do you want to give us a wave?
Morning, everyone.
And we've got Berna, our Research and Programmes Officer.
Hello.
And Daisy's with us, our Senior Officer for Policy and Public Affairs.
Hi, everyone.
And a little drum roll, because we're so excited that we're now joined by Kweku as our new Finance and Operations Manager. Kweku, do you want to say hello?
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
So that is the team, everybody. So this is the new, this is CSAN version whatever, the new team, and I'm very excited to have this team moving forward. So it's great to be with you all, and we're going to start with a prayer, and I'm delighted that Nikki is with us. Nikki's going to lead us in prayer in a very appropriate way. So Nikki, can I hand over to you for our opening prayer, please?
Sure. This is a prayer that was written by someone who calls herself Philippa. She's a survivor of domestic abuse. And I love this prayer because it's full of hope. This is Philippa's prayer. Lord, thank you. I love you. You saw me before I saw myself. Lord, thank you. I am amazed by you. You believed in me when I lost hope in myself. Lord, thank you. I love you. You guided me. I listened, and today I am free.
Thank you, Nikki. And can you just remind us where that's from?
That's one of the amazing women who contributed to my book on domestic abuse in church communities. There were about 5 or 6 women who wrote prayers from their lived experience. Yeah,
it's really powerful. Thank you. So it's my pleasure really to hand over to Nikki. I mean, many of us know Nikki Dillon-Keane. It's been our pleasure to work with Nikki, certainly since I came to CSAN for the last 3 years. Nikki is a trained therapist. She's going to be talking mostly about her work with Safe and Faith, which is, I think, really important work because it's supporting victims of domestic violence in a faith setting. And trying to help people of faith, and especially clergy, to understand what is going on with victims of domestic violence, and to do no harm, and to help, and not say the wrong things that can turn people around back into harmful situations. I think it's a really important work that Nikki's developing. Nikki, of course, wears many hats. She's here working with Caritas Westminster. She also does a lot of work with the National Board of Catholic Women and their VAWG committee, and it's been great to work with the national boards in recent years. Nikki has also been a great friend and supporter and contributor to CSAN's Aspiring Leaders programme. And she's brought to that programme a great understanding of trauma-informed practice, and has developed some very interesting work on trauma-informed leadership, which I think is more and more important. So, Nikki, it's great to see you as always. I'm going to hand over to you. If everyone else could be on mute, please. That's probably, I probably should have said that in my housekeeping remarks. So if everyone else can be on mute, please, during our speakers' presentations, that'd be really helpful. So, Nikki, over to you, please, to lead us into this this webinar.
Thank you, Raymond, always for such a lovely introduction. We've got a couple of things that we'd like to share with you today. One of them that I'm going to be talking about a bit later is the new resource that we've produced at Safe in Faith. But first of all, I'd like to share with you what I think is a very important resource that's been produced by the Faith and Violence Against Women and Girls, the Faith VAWG Coalition. And we've got a couple of amazing women here to speak to you about the work of the Faith VAWG Coalition and why this resource is important. So first of all, an absolute pleasure to introduce someone who's been a real mentor to me. Both of these women are people I've learned so much from. Sara Kirkpatrick is the CEO of Welsh Women's Aid, where she's led the team since early 2020, supporting specialist services across Wales as they experience the unprecedented challenges of a global pandemic and national lockdowns, in addition to the ongoing scourge of VAWG. She has spent her career providing support in women's refuge and worked with a range of client groups, including male victims and children impacted by domestic abuse and women remaining in abusive relationships, and also with perpetrators of domestic abuse. And her personal area of specialism is working with perpetrators and recognizing that if abusive behavior is a choice, then change is also a choice. She's contributed to several frontline innovative projects with perpetrators of intimate partner violence. And in addition to her CEO role, Sara is a trustee with Youth Realities, WAVE, and also of the Faith and VAWG Coalition. And we're very lucky at the National Board of Catholic Women that she sits on the VAWG committee with us and is a wonderful and valuable member there. She's also a visiting lecturer at Winchester University. And she's also one of the people from whom I've learned more than anything about the work that we do. Very, very proud to introduce Sara.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Oh, terrifying. There's a huge picture of me looking back at me now. Somewhat disconcerting. I feel like you've told everyone a little bit about me, but I feel like it's really important whenever I say hello, to sort of introduce myself to a group and say, why is it relevant for me to be in the room with you? So I'm just going to tell you very briefly a little bit about me as a somewhat lapsed Catholic. Because I am going to talk to you about why do faith leaders need this guidance, but I'm also going to talk about why faith is so central to some people's lives. So for me, I was raised in a house of converts where faith was really important. I was raised in a home where we were convent adjacent. I saw nuns as part of an extended family, and I still startle nuns when I'm wandering around towns and I say, hello, sister, because they are part of my extended network, whether I've met them or not. So in my core, I was raised knowing that the church was family. And like so many of us, that means that also clergy and others within the church, they are my trusted others. Often that is who I look to for help and support. So that's sort of my background, is that I was raised around a very deep understanding of the connection of faith. Even though I am now lapsed, I completely get how central it is to somebody's life. So then I'm going to move and I'm going to tell you about my working life. So I started my working life in a women's refuge, and that apparently in my head had nothing to do with faith or the church. I worked with women who were ripped away from everything that was familiar. And I want to describe to you very briefly the experience of entering a refuge for someone. This is someone who has experienced abuse to the point where they've decided that they will go to an unknown destination. They will stay in who knows what sort of accommodation with who knows what other people. They know that there will be rules. They know that there will be restrictions, and yet they will put all of their life, their most precious possessions into bags and step into that complete uncertainty. And they will do that because it is still better than staying with the abuse. And I think that's a really important moment for us to consider, is that when someone, and my first professional experience of working around violence against women and girls was at that moment of crisis for people who were leaving everything behind and were prepared to stay in this unknown destination rather than live continually experiencing abuse. But people don't wake up one day in a safe and healthy relationship and the following day they need to be in a refuge. There is a journey, and many survivors are reaching out for help and support along that journey. And the place that they reach out is often to their trusted others. And for those of us that are from a faith community, that trusted other may well be someone from the congregation, it may well be a priest. So why do faith leaders need guidance? Is because you are the trusted other, and giving a good response may shorten someone's journey, may shorten someone's experience of abuse, and more importantly, might well be an opportunity for them to not ever have to enter a refuge. So for me, that feels like a really important conversation to have with you all. I have here in my notes, tell the anecdote. So I am going to tell you an anecdote from a time when I was working in the refuge. And it was the moment where it clicked for me that we need domestic abuse literacy within faith communities, just as much as we need faith literacy within domestic abuse services. So I describe her as a little old lady, although now on reflection, she was probably the same age I am now. So a woman moved to our refuge, and it was the first time that she had named the abuse, stepped out of the abuse, and she was very anxious. She felt like she was betraying her marriage vows. She was very upset. And she stayed in the refuge. She didn't leave. Other women went out and did the shopping and stuff. So she literally didn't leave the place for nearly 3 weeks. And we had sat and talked a lot. And she was tied up in knots about betraying her marriage vows, about, as someone who'd made a commitment for life, how she had failed, how she had let herself down and let God down. And so she was having a true struggle with this. And as we talked, I helped her sort of look at, she was in a town that wasn't her own town. She identified where the local Catholic church was. And so her first outing from the refuge, her first time of leaving the building, was to go downtown, to go to that source of support, that sanctuary. And she went down there and she spoke to the priest. And she came back to the refuge and packed. And she returned to her marriage because she had turned to that sanctuary, that source of support, and had expressed her concerns about breaking her vows and about, you know, failing. And sadly, the steer that priest gave her was perhaps she should return and try a little bit harder. And that was the message that she took. She came home, she thanked us for our help and support, and she was gone that day. She returned to an abusive home, a home that had been abusive and that she'd been experiencing significant abuse, violence over many, many years. And I remember afterwards feeling how disappointed I was in myself, but also how if I'd reached out to the priest sooner, if I'd gone with her, if we'd had that relationship, so that it wasn't just a woman with a dilemma, but actually if that faith leader had understood exactly what was happening and exactly why that woman was walking away for a moment, maybe he would have given different advice, different support, and she wouldn't have come straight back to the refuge and packed. For me, all these years later, it still lives with me. It still feels like a moment where an opportunity was missed. And so for that reason, faith leaders being open to thinking about how can you be part of the solution, part of how to end the scourge of domestic abuse feels really, really important. So the next thing I wanted to talk very briefly about was that in our congregations, we are not just walking alongside survivors, we are also walking alongside perpetrators. And as my personal area of specialism is working with those who have been using harmful behaviour, sometimes been convicted, sometimes been to prison for abusing their partners, it feels really important to say that I have spoken to many, many men, and I have primarily worked with male perpetrators, but I've talked to them about, was it always like this? And a good number of perpetrators have said, well, I did talk to someone, you know, to check what I was doing, you know, when I was concerned that my behaviour was not acceptable. And they talked about going sometimes to faith leaders and often to GPs, and not getting the sort of advice and support that said, look at you and think about your behaviour. They got advice and support like it's an anger management issue, you're in difficult times, you know, it'll pass. And so for me, there is also something about when we are talking to faith leaders, indeed, when I'm talking to anyone who is meeting the general population, to remind ourselves, we are not just encountering survivors and need to be thoughtful about how we speak to them. We are also encountering and speaking to perpetrators. And we need to remind them that if abuse is a choice, then change is also a choice, and that anyone can do better. The other reason that it's important to think about perpetrators, those who use harmful behaviour, is because someone who is choosing to abuse makes weapons that are customised to the victim. And I don't mean actual weapons like guns and swords. I mean weapons of the heart. Often we can weaponize those things that people are scared of, but it's also entirely possible to take things which are precious, things that people care about, and turn them into weapons. And within a faith setting, the two things that I heard over and over again about weaponization of faith was preventing someone from accessing their community or misrepresenting what our tenets are. Because, to be fair, if someone holds God in their heart, then the most effective lever is to weaponize God, to place God in the position of the oppressor. That's an outrageous thing to do. It's nonetheless very effective if you are talking to someone who has a faith and who holds that really dearly. So why do we need guidance for faith leaders? Because if you hold in your head that notion that what you're saying might well be misrepresented, might be presented in a different context to how you wanted it to be said, you'll think about having conversations, like a joint conversation where you ask somebody to share their hopes and fears with both a husband and a wife present. Sometimes that's a great plan. But if there is any concern about abuse, you haven't got an even playing field. So how do you make sure that both people in that conversation are safe? How do you make sure or ensure that after your conversations, those conversations are not returned and used as weapons, as tools in an abusive experience? So I have a couple more points, because my final note says, so over to you. Why do you need the guidance? I'm absolutely confident that you are the trusted other for so many people, and that people will turn to you often as the first source of support. And I am equally confident that the responses you give will be well-intentioned advice. My hope is that this guidance is going to give you the opportunity to make sure that that well-intentioned advice is absolutely right, that it has reduced the possibility of weaponization. It's impossible to eliminate, because perpetrators are very creative and can customize their abuse. But if we are all a little bit more thoughtful, or a little bit thoughtful about potential harms and the choice to abuse, then I hope that together we make the world different, and we reduce the likelihood of domestic abuse lasting for far too many years and causing far too much misery in individual lives. And I'm going to stop there. Nikki.
Thank you, Sarah, as always. So powerful and thought-provoking. And I'm really grateful to you. And I'm hoping you'll be able to stay and join us for questions later on, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to have a lot of questions for you. It's now my very great pleasure to introduce my colleague, friend and sister, Huda Jawad, who is, well, she calls herself a co-founder of the Faith VAWG Coalition, but actually she was the original co-founder who found the rest of us and brought us all together. She describes the Faith VAWG Coalition as a partnership of organisations working at the intersection of faith, feminism and violence against women and girls. Huda is an intersectional Muslim feminist, and she's also one of the trio of award-winning anti-racist campaign group, the Three Hijabis, who started a petition signed by 1.2 million people to ban racists from football in response to the backlash against 3 Black England players in the 2020 Euro Cup final. She is a founding member of the anti-racism working group tasked by the women's sector to create an anti-racism charter that can be adopted sector-wide. She's also the former co-director of Musawa, an international non-governmental organization leading the global movement for equality and justice in the Muslim family. She was the lead co-organizer of the Women's March London, organizing annual events and public demonstrations, bringing over 600,000 demonstrators to the streets of London to protest misogyny and racism. And she's currently a trustee of Counterpoint Arts, a refugee arts charity, and former co-chair of the End Violence Against Women Coalition. She's also someone who has inspired me and is such an amazing woman of faith. You've helped me be a better Catholic. She's such an amazing Muslim. So very, very welcome, and hand over to Huda. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Is it morning still? Yes, it is. That's so kind. What an amazing introduction. And I thought I sent you the short bio, so apologies. What an honor to be here with my brothers and sisters in humanity. I have especially enjoyed Sarah's presentation, and it really inspired me to kind of share with you a bit about my spiritual and faith positionality with you today. So obviously I'm a Muslim. I am practicing. I am of the Shia branch of Islam. My connection to my faith is not because of a conviction. I obviously was brought up in the Muslim faith, but the experience of migrating and becoming a refugee and coming as a child to this country, well, I turned 11 here. Not speaking a word of English, but also having never left the Middle East. I was born in Baghdad and traveled around Syria and Abu Dhabi in the Gulf and all those places. And so coming to the UK set a chain of events that really forced me, if that's the right word, to reckon with myself and my beliefs. And I chose to be a Muslim when I was, I guess, a teenager, because and I chose to forge my own path to Islam as opposed to what I had been taught. And I continue to, because like many of you who have faith, you understand it's a lifelong practice, and you evolve as your revelation into faith is increased and unfolds. I also I have what would you call it? Religious establishment in my family. So my great grandfather is an Ayatollah, and has been a tutor of all the current or the one before the demised Ayatollahs before him. So the respect for the religious institution in my family is part and parcel of way of life, a bit like Sara. I grew up around people who are deeply committed to their faith and were guiding and supporting and shepherding the community. And so I have a huge respect and appreciation for the power of clergy to transform the lives of people around them. And so it is from that space of true belief, but also appreciation for the transformative role of people who preach faith and who try to support community to find their spiritual position in the world, that I come to you to talk about the role of the Faith VAWG Coalition, but specifically our spiritual abuse guidance that we created. If I may, I'm going to try and just quickly share with you a half-baked presentation. I haven't quite finished it, but I've done 75% of it. So I'll have to talk to the rest of that. But yeah, just bear with me while I try and, I think I need to open it first. Here we are. There we go. Let me try again. And Nikki, please do tell me when I have stepped over my timing. I hope you can see that. I can't do anything about the sidebar, but this is the Faith VAWG Coalition, which was set up in 2020, officially launched with the amazing women that are here with you today, Nikki and Sara, to kind of really tackle two things. Essentially, the Faith VAWG Coalition is a set of organizations and individual activists who believe that faith and minoritized communities, and here I mean communities who are often described as BAME or BME, have a vital role to play to end violence against women and girls. And as such, the coalition members deal with the intersections of faith, race, and feminism in relation to violence against women and girls. The coalition really is keen to build a movement of specialist organizations and individuals and advocates from across all communities of faith and none to end violence against women and girls. We also, as a coalition, recognize the gap between what's available out there in terms of secular help and what faith communities do, and the survivors from faith communities experience, and the barriers that they face in accessing life-saving support. So Sarah's example of the Women's Refuge is an illustration of how faith literacy is needed within these settings, not just a kind of literacy around violence against women and girls within faith institutions, but the two are part of the same coin, we believe. And we work to bridge the gap, this gap, to ensure that women and children who experience violence and abuse in these communities are not given are helped to be given appropriate support and a holistic support, rather than kind of feeling that they have to do the reconciling between opposing forms of advice from their trusted other who are within their community or faith leadership, and also from their service providers or the supporters from the women's sector. We are very keen to highlight our values to everyone, and we really use them to guide the work that we do and our vision. So we ascribe to an inclusive feminist analysis of male violence against women. We believe faith and religion can be used and have the ethical traditions to eliminate violence against women and girls. We believe that violence against women and girls is aided by various systems of oppression that marginalizes people. We are grounded in our experience and expertise as all of these things, as survivors of abuse, as believers, as professionals within the women's sector. As a coalition, we actively pursue learning and reflexivity in our own work and our practice, and we firmly believe that there is no hierarchy of faith, belief or no faith or non-belief. All of us and all of them and are us, and we are equal, and we can all work collaboratively together for that purpose. What we do is trying to build a movement and make systemic change. So we amplify the voices of survivors from faith backgrounds. We want to build literacy and knowledge both within the women's movement and secular agencies about the important role of faith, and speak to that as Sara has spoken, but also build a movement of collaboration between faith communities who have been supporting survivors and dealing with perpetrators long before there was an organized, formalized sort of civic society grouping around domestic abuse and gender-based violence. So we want to learn from faith communities, but also support them in understanding the kind of systems and structures that they will have to support their congregation in kind of moving across and working across them. We want to enable positive policy and practice change. And it is within this vein that we created the domestic abuse, the spiritual abuse guidance, because we believe if policymakers and those with decision-making powers can understand what the impact of laws and policy that they're making, they can do it better to serve people better. And then also we want to engage and learn from faith communities, because the wisdom that they hold in supporting survivors, in working with perpetrators, is something of extreme value to everyone, particularly to the civic space that tries to support survivors from domestic abuse and sexual violence. So spiritual abuse, many of you will have dealt with it, will probably know about it and can recognize it, but for the purposes of how it works within a gendered lens, we have defined spiritual abuse as a tool of power and control that can present as a form of domestic abuse and with exacerbating factors such as physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, and economic abuse. Spiritual abuse uses religion, culture, and faith systems to control and subjugate a victim. And it's often characterized by a systemic pattern of coercive or controlling behavior that can take place within a faith and spiritual context. And the perpetrator may share the same faith as the victim or survivor, or they may not. They either could be a different faith or no faith at all. And the forms of spiritual abuse that can take place, and this is not an exhaustive list, but this can include, and I've written that particularly for the women's sector who tend to not understand the manifestations of spiritual abuse. So apologies if all of this is knowledgeable to you already. So it is about forcing the victim to partake in spiritual or religious practice that is against their will. I'm currently fasting because it's the month of Ramadan. An example of that would be to force me to break my fast, or it could be forcing me to watch pornography, or it could be forcing me to steal, those kind of examples. Preventing the victim from partaking in spiritual or religious practice, or ridiculing cultural or spiritual beliefs, and often forcing them to convert to a new religion. Using twisted or weaponized forms of religious or spiritual teachings, or cherry-picking elements of sacred texts to use, or tradition to use as a form of coercing and controlling women, and forcing women to stay with the abuser. And, you know, it's no surprise that in the Abrahamic faiths, the idea of marriage being a form of a place of sanctity and a position of sanctity, and that should not be easily broken, is a way in which perpetrators use to control women from leaving or ending the relationship. and using cultural or religious and spiritual ideas or beliefs as reasons to cause harm. For example, interpretations of texts that place men in a higher position of authority or proximity to God or to the divine. The other one is, so here is kind of the examples of impact of spiritual abuse. And Sarah's example is a very, very potent one of how the act of seeking reassurance about the fact that the woman did not sin is really what she was looking for from her story. This is what I understand, and I have come across that, rather than has she done the right thing, because you can feel like you've done the right thing, but you can also feel that that right thing is a sin. And so many women of faith want to make sure that they haven't sinned, because the civic space or the secular services or the women's sector will tell them that actually you are doing the right thing, it is not okay what is happening, but they do not speak the language of the spirit or the heart. And it is our faith community that tells us if we are in alignment with our divine kind of beliefs. So the impact of spiritual abuse means that you know, the manipulation and exploitation of religious scripture, teachings, and cultural traditions really is very, very potent. It could also mean that women have to be forced to be accountable. So an example would be that you are not allowed to spend any money because I am the earner, and you have to give a detailed account of how money was spent or decisions were made, because God asked me to be the one. Certainly in Islam, there is this patriarchal interpretation of the idea of looking after and supporting women, which means that a woman has to be accountable to her partner, male partner, for various decisions. Censorship and denying liberty or capacity to make independent decisions, which ties into that. Sometimes women are not allowed out of the house because they are told that they need their husband's permission, mistakenly, obviously, because God doesn't need that. Rape and sexual assault within the context of intimate or marital relationships, and using religious scripture to justify that, or to say that now that you have had sexual relationship with me, you must marry me, and using that as a way of kind of forcing women to maintain a relationship with someone that they may wish not to. Coercion to conform, control, and enforce observations and practices. So again, if I use the example of the fasting, scripture does not require me to fast if I am on my period, or if I'm pregnant, or if I'm sick, or if I'm breastfeeding, but the perpetrator might say, well, I decide that these things are not relevant to you, so you have to fast. Or that I know that these are not requirements by God, but I'm in a position where there is no food in the house and I am forced de facto to fast, etc. I have another slide here. Causing harm, isolation, or neglect to get rid of an evil force or a spirit, or in the Arabic language, a jinn, that we feel that it is believed to have possessed the victim, and accusations of witchcraft, and these are as old as time. Requirement of obedience to the perpetrator, or owing to religion or faith for their divine position. So again, it's this idea that male privilege acts is justified by the divine, because God made man in his image, or created Adam, and there's a hierarchy of creation, etc. Community isolation as a means of punishment. Often this was really felt as a consequence of the COVID pandemic, where women had to stay at home, which often was the most unsafe place to be. And the respite and support from the congregations or from the community was prevented. And so similarly, a perpetrator would stop a woman from congregating in the community. And in certain faiths, women-only settings are religiously sanctioned community spaces, and that's often where they could sort of hide or disclose the fact that they are being abused, and the denial of that option again denies them the possibility of getting help and support. And finally, surveillance and monitoring of movement using religious justification. Often I cite this example of a woman who is, after gets permission leaving the home, is FaceTimed by her husband every half an hour to find out where she is. And not only does she have to pick up the phone, she also has to show him who's with her. I mean, it doesn't mean that she will not hide certain people or that other people won't hide, but this assumption that, and she would pick up the phone, and she's a educated grown woman and knows her rights, but she would pick up the phone and do exactly as she is told, because she doubts her belief that this is wrong, and he uses that to say that God sanctions this behavior. Then I wanted to kind of talk to you about the spiritual abuse and the other intersecting factors that are important in our spiritual abuse guidance, and that's the issue of kind of race, faith erasure, and sexuality, which on top of all these examples act very differently depending on the circumstance that we're talking about. So often when religion and race intersects, often the survivor or the victim fears the impact of collective punishment of the perpetrator if they happen to be non-white, and what they will experience from white agencies like the police or social services, or in fact what the woman herself will experience from agencies that don't understand her cultural and racial sensitivities. There's also the very real issue of faith erasure, where often white women are invisibilized and assumed not to have any faith, because in the sort of women's movement and social justice, faith is not seen as a part of and parcel of one's identity and work and lived experience. So often these women's services will not talk about a woman's faith if she's not black or brown, essentially. If she's a white woman, no one breaks the conversation around faith and spirituality. And in that way, her needs are not being met. Also, very often, non-white Christians are misidentified as either Muslim or other religious grouping, and often Sikhs are identified as Muslims or misidentified as Muslims. So there's all these kind of complications about getting help because of the way you look or what you believe in. And then obviously sexuality and being from, the gay, lesbian, and gender non-conforming and queer community and trans community, which in itself is not only an experience that the perpetrator may use, or that the community, the congregation that you belong to can misunderstand and has serious prejudice around, but also the secular services that claim to support you, or in fact, specialist services for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans people are often faith phobic sometimes, or do not see faith. And so you quite are caught in that space of not being able to kind of get the holistic support that you require. And then, yes, I think obviously age is a huge factor, and being a person of a certain age, there are assumptions about your faith and religiosity, but also your capability and resources that you have. And so it is seen that younger people kind of have less resources and less power with either their secular space, but also within their religious and faith communities. And particularly religious leadership is very, very important as an intersecting factor, because abuse perpetrated by religious leaders creates an additional barrier to seeking help, because, you know, obviously a religious leader is in a space, a position of power and responsibility and adoration, and so somebody who would cast doubt on that is not often seen favorably by the congregation, and that complicated factor is not seen appropriately or understood by secular services. And then we also have things like mental health and disability, which are important to recognize, because often, particularly in the in the global majority space, there is so much less resource for religious institutions and organizations to remove the physical barriers, let alone the kind of social and cultural barriers for people who don't fit in the ideal in our communities, that actually the particular needs of people with disability and mental health are not catered for within our religious community, but also within secular space. And finally, gender, and the idea that God is inherently talked about as male, and how religious leadership in the mind's eye is always a man with a certain appearance, never a woman, certainly not until very recently in the church, but certainly not in other faiths in the same way. So that really concludes my presentation about the spiritual abuse guidance that we issued for faith leaders, but also for the women's sector, and anybody who wants to understand more about it. And I'm happy to take any questions or points at the appropriate time. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Huda. Thank you so much, Huda. You know, whenever we talk with each other, I'm so struck by how many similarities there are with the situations that you describe, and with the work that I do with Catholic women, and how sometimes the language changes, but that weaponization of spirituality that Sara was talking about, that you were describing, happens across every faith. And it's so important that here in Catholic settings we are aware of that, and that's why I think this spiritual abuse guidance is such an important resource. So thank you so much for sharing that. And there will be, I'm sure you've got loads of questions for both these amazing women. There will be time for that in a bit. I'm just going to suggest that we take a little comfort break, just 5 minutes or so. So if we come back just a couple of minutes past 12, and then I'll tell you a little bit about our new resource at Safe in Faith, and then there'll be a chance to ask questions after that. So if we say a couple of minutes past 12, that we'll be back here, And I'll let you all have a, refresh your cups of tea or whatever it is that you need to do. Thank you all. So if it's okay, if you'll indulge me for a little bit, I'm going to share with you a new resource that we've developed at Safe in Faith. And I'll try not to take up too much of your time because I'm sure you're dying to ask questions. So can you all see that? Yeah, brilliant. So I think quite a lot of you probably are a bit familiar with Safe in Faith. I'll tell you a little bit about this. But what I'd really like to talk about is our new resource, which is a signposting toolkit. So Safe in Faith is it's a project, a service of Caritas Westminster. And it's a safety-focused, trauma-informed support based in Catholic social teaching. So what we're offering at the moment, and we are looking to expand and to do more work, and some of that being frontline work, but what we're doing at the moment is we're providing training, specific training for Catholic clergy and religious and parish workers, people who might come across survivors of domestic abuse within their parishes. So we train them how to respond safely. We also train an interfaith group of counsellors and psychotherapists and other helping professionals how to address those issues of faith. And one of the things that Huda said that I think is really important, that unless you look really obviously like you have a faith by the way you dress, for example, it tends to not be addressed by support services. And that misses the opportunity to really look at how faith can be a support to you, but also how faith sometimes can create barriers to safety seeking. I mean, and particularly when it's been weaponized in the ways that Sara described. So we do all of that work, and we also have an interfaith counselling network. And through our website, we've got an increasing amount of resources and information that's available. The training that we do in Catholic contexts is understanding domestic abuse and spiritual abuse. Sorry, I didn't mean to click on that yet. And how to respond in really safe and trauma-informed ways. But also, if you're doing this work a lot, how to look after yourself and protect yourself from vicarious trauma. And we also look at signposting to other agencies, because what's really important is that, you know, people don't feel overwhelmed by the immensity of these difficulties. And so we're very clear that we're not expecting clergy or other people in church contexts to fix everything. We're helping them to provide the part of the service that can't be provided elsewhere, which is that part that says, God loves you, God wants you to be safe. God doesn't ask us to stay in dangerous spaces. And then to signpost to the people who are professionals and very experienced and able to help with those safety seeking and legal issues. These are some of the things that I've heard from clergy and from survivors I've been working with, and why it's so important that we really understand how to signpost to people in the most helpful and effective ways. So, for example, I was talking to a parish priest, and the only thing he could think of doing when somebody told him that they were experiencing domestic abuse was to suggest going to the police, which she didn't feel able to do. And so he felt completely stuck. Or another person, the local domestic abuse service that he was aware of, she'd already had a really negative experience there, did not want to go back. And so again, he felt completely stuck and didn't know how to help. And then, you know, a couple of survivors talking about the need for support that understands their identity, or feeling really overwhelmed. And sometimes when people are traumatized, having lots and lots of options is very hard, because we can very easily feel overwhelmed when we're traumatized. I'm not going to go through all of this, and this is not a comprehensive list. You often hear the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a community of professionals to support someone to safety. You know, it's just that sense that we're not meant to do all of it, but we have in these church contexts, we have a very, very important role that none of these people can fill. They can do things that we can't necessarily do, but we have a really vital role. Part of that role is helping people feel confident that they're not going against their faith teaching by seeking safety. And then part of that role is to help people access safety. So this toolkit has information about what to do in an emergency, and signposting in different ways through the different stages of somebody's journey. We also have information about by and for services and support for specific issues. We tried to create a document that in itself is trauma informed. We obviously strive to be a trauma informed service. So part of that is trying to be clear and easy to read. And if somebody's in a bit of a panicky state, either because they've been victimized themselves or because they're feeling very nervous about how to support somebody and they're suddenly thrown into a situation and they're not quite sure how to support somebody, that they can very easily navigate this document and find the right information. We also try to avoid using, you know, some of those awful photographs you often see on literature like this. So we've used this artwork that's been done, this abstract and I think very calming artwork that we had done for this. I just want to say a couple of words about how I think this toolkit is different from others, because it recognizes how depending what stage someone's at in their journey, the way you would signpost them could be very different. So if someone, for example, is at a stage where they're just trying to work out whether or not what's happening to them is domestic abuse, or if somebody is in danger and really needs help getting safe, the way you would signpost them would be different from someone who maybe has been several years out of their relationship, out of danger, but needs help healing from that trauma. Or if somebody, for example, is many years down the line, and what they'd really like to do is find meaning in their experiences by helping other people. And we also recognize that there are people, and I think Huda described this really well, for whom it's really beneficial to be signposted to services that understand their identity, their gender and sexual identity, their cultural identity, their linguistic needs and cultural needs. And also that sometimes there are people who need support for a very specific situation. For example, if they're dealing with a family corpse, or if there's a threat that their children might be removed, that they need support that's really specific for that. We've designed this toolkit with certain people in mind using it. I think it's something that could be useful for a much wider group of people. But this is who we had in mind, that it's really people in working in parishes and church schools, and anyone in a faith setting who may be coming into contact with somebody who is seeking support. We call it a living document, and that's because it's in no way perfect. It's in no way finished. I don't think it will ever be finished. It's something that we keep adding to and perfecting and improving. And for that reason, we don't have a hard copy of it. It exists on our website, so we can update it and change it. And we invite people to give us feedback if they have made use of the services that we've included in the document. So that if, for example, a new service is launched, or if somebody has perhaps a difficult experience with a service that we've included, and we have done due diligence on the services we've included, but you know, we do invite that feedback so that we can update the information, and that's a constant process. And also your feedback about usability, because we are aware that, you know, there's certainly room for improvement, and we want to keep that process as an ongoing process. So how you will access the toolkit is through our website, and that is our website there. And there is, you can scroll down. We also have our poster just above it. And we do invite you to download that poster and display it in churches, because that's going to help people find us when they need to. But we keep the toolkit only on the website so that we can keep it as a living document. We can make sure that it's constantly updated, so there are no out-of-date versions lying around. So that is the toolkit. That's the reason behind the toolkit, and how we've tried to create something as useful as possible. I'm just going to stop sharing now. And you know, I do invite you to share that, and particularly you know, in your parishes with your priests, to share that information, because we know from statistics, we know that in every parish there are going to be people who need this support, and they're not, it's not going to necessarily be obvious who they are, but the more that we can equip parishes to be able to support people in this way, the more people we can support